distinguished guests and fellow colleagues, a very good afternoon and welcome to today's CLC lecture series, the fourth in the 2016 series of lectures. My name is Sulaiman. I work at the Center for Global Cities and I will be your MC for this afternoon. The Center was jointly established by the Ministry of National Development and the Ministry of the Environment and Water Resources in 2008 to distill, create, and share knowledge on livable and sustainable cities. The CLC lecture series is one of the platforms through which urban thought leaders share best practices and exchange ideas and experiences. For today's session, we are honored to have with us Professor Geoffrey West, distinguished professor and former president of the Center for Institute. He will discuss how ideas used to solve complex and diverse issues in cities could be extended to companies to address the implications for growth, development, and long-term sustainability. The presentation will be followed by a moderated panel discussion and a Q&A session with the audience, which will be moderated by Mr. Aaron Maniam, Director of the Industry Division at the Ministry of Trade and Industry, and our WCS Young Leader. At this juncture, could I please invite you to please put your mobile devices to silent or airplane mode for the duration of the lecture. Let us now begin the lecture by inviting Professor West on stage. Professor West, please.
Well, thank you for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me. Oh, you can't hear me. Okay, I'll try to do this. Sorry, because I need to walk. Pleasure to be here. I've been talking all day, so this will be part of the continuation of the conversation. I have this kind of 18th century title that sort of tells the whole story, pretty much. I will try to cover an enormous amount of territory and leave many loose ends that maybe during the question period, discussion period, we'll be able to cover. So I think everybody's familiar with this extraordinary phenomenon, because we're part of it, of the fact that the planet is becoming almost entirely urbanized in terms of socioeconomic activity. Let's see, which is the one that does this one. Someone. Okay, let's start again. Sorry. Okay. Well, everyone's sort of familiar with this, that we're living in this exponential expansion, not only of population, but in particular, most of that population now is going into urbanization. And this is just the US figures. It's true of most of the entire planet, especially the developing world, that the United States was just a few percent urbanized 200 years ago. It's now over 80%. The planet crossed the halfway mark just a few years ago. It's going to move towards the 70 to 80% level towards the middle to end of the next century. And just to give you a sense of the scale of that, this slide. Did it go? I'm going to stand. Obviously, I need to stand. I'll have to stand again. So this is what it's equivalent to. It's equivalent, roughly speaking, just do the averaging. It's equivalent to urbanizing roughly 1.5 million people a week, which is equivalent to adding a New York City every couple of months, or Singapore, in terms of its infrastructure, roughly speaking, every month. From now, continuously, till 2050, and that is kind of extraordinary in terms of the stress on resources, energy, and in particular on the social fabric. So this is an enormous issue, an enormous challenge for the planet, and we are all part of it, and we participate clearly in creating this extraordinary challenge, which has all kinds of amazing consequences, which I'd like to explore with you. So, here's China, which you're more familiar with than I am, I'm sure. Namely, China has already just became late to urbanization, but it crossed the halfway point just about now, roughly. It's about half urbanized, half not, and is heading on this exponential rise towards being 70 or so % urbanized towards the end of the century. And that means that, of course, it has to build, as it claims, 200 to 300 new cities, each in excess of 1 million people in the next 15 to 20 years, which is unbelievable. And so that's just China, but we also have India, and we have Latin America, and all of Africa, sort of on this kind of fast track to urbanization. So this is an enormous challenge, and the fight for, just to repeat myself, for resources and energy are going to be quite dramatic. So, you're familiar with these, the pictures of the planet at night. If a picture like this had been possible when I was a young boy, a long, long time ago, it would have been a dull. This would have been much duller. And now we have this kind of virus that's taken over the planet. And that is, of course, just a manifestation of the exponential growth of population. Here it is, since human beings became communal, became socioeconomic. We're on this almost vertical rise when we look at it on a grand scale. And of course, all that's associated with the exponential, open-ended paradigm growth trajectory that we invented basically a couple hundred years ago. And everything is now, everything is based on the idea that we need to sustain open-ended exponential growth. So the fate of the planet is determined to a large extent by the fate of our cities. Understanding what goes on in cities, understanding cities themselves, their dynamics and structure becomes something of some urgency. So just to remind you, in case you've forgotten what a city looks like, here's cities, this is you, and of course cities are associated with great material well-being, great opportunities for jobs, great access to almost everything, not just material well-being, but also cultural activities of various kinds, education, with restaurants, and so on and so forth. This is what is so attractive about cities. But all of that has to be, all of this has to be driven by energy. Energy is fundamental. None of this obviously can happen without energy supply. And if it's supplied by energy, there's a fundamental law of the universe that if you transform energy, you can't do it for nothing. You produce entropy somewhere. You produce pollution, so to speak. You produce random behavior, chaotic behavior, when you try to organize, as we try to do in terms of cities. So a result of this is something I would call socioeconomic entropy, and so by transforming that energy and building up extraordinary places like Singapore, somewhere we have phenomena like this have to happen. All of these kinds of phenomena are a result of that, and an inevitable result, and the question is how to minimize them, but they are there, and we have to deal with them. And even this, which I believe is also a result of this huge, this extraordinary rate of expansion that we're doing, of course it's put in the guise of politics and religion and so forth, but fundamentally I think it's to do with this incredible stress that we have, that we're, this hidden phenomenon that we're expanding exponentially. And the question is that what cities are going to look like in 50 or 100 years? Is that what Singapore and New York and London are going to look like in 50 or 100 years, or they're going to look like the pictures we saw earlier? So I showed you the pictures I showed you of cities at the moment are the kind of image that you have when you use the word city. You think of buildings and cityscapes and so forth, streets, gatherings and so on. But what a city really is people. That's the whole point of cities, is to facilitate interaction of people. And I will return to that in a moment. So cities are people, and this is really what a city is the interaction between people, the gathering of people, both formally and informally. That's Paris, that's Orchard Street here. And that's a picture of 120 years ago of New York City, and it pretty much says what a city is all about and what a city in a certain sense should be, even though New York doesn't look like this anymore. Of course it does look like this because you see here the platform upon which all this takes place. The infrastructure is still exactly the same as it was when this picture was taken. The buildings exist, the road exists, but the activity here is the essence of city. This is people coming together, interacting, entrepreneurial activity, ideas are created, there's a certain buzz, wealth is being created, and so forth. So that's what a city is. It's that churning, creating atmospheres like this for both innovation and wealth creation to take place. And even though, as I said, all those buildings are still there, people don't gather like this, but the whole point of New York City, the only reason of a New York City is for this to take place still, but maybe inside the buildings, maybe in a different format and so on, but to create that kind of buzz and so on, and that's what Singapore is here for. Okay, so one of the aspects of this is that if you try to understand the city, is to understand this interface between these two different pieces of a city, and it's true of any complex system, it's true of life, but in particular, this tension and this integration between the physicality of a city in terms of energy resources, which we could call the metabolism of a city, represented, as I said, by its physicality and infrastructure, has to be integrated with its exchange of information. The point of a city is to maximize the exchange of information, as I say, creating ideas and wealth. And that's kind of the genomics of the city, or the neural part of the city. And these are not independent, even though typically they're both in biology, we consider them metabolics different from genomics. They're totally integrated as they have to be in the city. So all of the problems that we're facing on the planet today, from climate change to questions of resources, energy, water, questions of health, questions of pollution, and so on, all of these have come to the fore because of this huge exponential expansion of urbanization. So all of these problems originated in cities because that's where most of the energy is being transformed, and that's where most of the people live. So cities are the origin of all of the problems we face. But they're also the solution because cities have been magnets, vacuum cleaners that have sucked up not just people, but the smart people. All the ideas, all the innovation, all the wealth is created almost entirely in cities. So the question is any of this sustainable? And this is sort of a backdrop of what I'm going to talk about, some of these questions, and to discuss something about the city. But most importantly is that from this I conclude that if we are to have sustainable cities, if we have to have a sustainable planet, and all of this is to survive, we desperately need to ask the question, is it possible to have a theory, a science, so to speak, of cities that is quantitative and predictive? And that may not be possible. That may just be impossible, but I want to explore that with you. And of course, it has to invoke all of these kinds of concepts: resilience, evolvability, growth, scalability, and so forth. And of course, in that, all of these various things, this is a laundry list of all the various things that come together in any socioeconomic system, in particular in the city. And I'm not going to go into them, but the only point I want to make is they all come together. Each one of these is a complex, adaptive, evolving system, and most importantly, they're not independent. They're all coupled, and they're all part of a systemic problem. And if you treat one of the things you learn when you study complex adaptive systems, if you treat just one piece of it only, then you are very likely to have unintended consequences that change everything elsewhere. So it is important to recognize the holistic nature of these, the fact that these are not independent and are highly coupled, and that it is dangerous just to think of solving one particular problem, even if it is something as grand as dealing with energy, or something that's dealing with climate change, or something that's dealing with health, or something that's dealing with the environment. All of these need to be thought of in one unified framework. So I want to talk a little bit about that, and I want to do it by first talking a teeny bit about biology, and I want to ask some questions which we will translate into cities and companies a little bit later. And so here are questions which are very generic questions, which I assume all of you in some form or another have wondered about. Why is it that the span of your life is of over 100 years? You may only live 80 years, but why isn't it 200 years, or 2,000 years, or 2 million years, or 2 years? Where the hell does that number come from? Why do we have that number? Where does it come from? And how is it generated from all the molecular dynamics that goes on that keeps you alive in your cells and your respiratory system and so on, which all those timescales, the molecular timescales, are very small. Where the hell does 100 years come from? And why is it that if you were a mouse, which you might as well have been, because in a kind of coarse-grained way, mice are not so different than you are in terms of the meat. Your flesh is pretty much the same, the cells are the same, the meat is the same. Why is it if you were a mouse you only lived 2 or 3 years? So these are the kinds of questions. So why does that happen? And how is that related to this? That was Galileo. There was Galileo. He aged and he died like me soon. How is that related to this? All these companies died. Several workers were sort of resurrected artificially. So what is the relationship? And hopefully, if I have enough time, I will talk about the mortality of companies. So these are similar kinds of coarse-grained questions that we could ask about. Why do you sleep 8 hours a night, and so forth. But going more to the meat of the talk, and to the picture of companies, first, are citizen companies biology? They came from biology, and we talk about the DNA of a company, the metabolism of a city, the ecology of the marketplace, all these kinds of metaphors, and the question is, are they just qualitative metaphors, or do they have some serious substance? And the question that I find most intriguing, which hopefully I'll have a little time at the end to talk about, is why is it that in fact all companies, as far as we can tell, are destined to die, like everybody in this room? No companies survive. Doesn't matter how grand they are and how rich they are, they eventually disappear. But almost all cities survive. Very hard to kill a city. You can think of ancient cities that disappeared, but almost all cities that have grown on this planet still exist, and you can even drop atom bombs on cities, and 20, 30 years later they're fine. But you don't have to do very much in terms of changing the economic forces for companies to die. Okay, so in what sense is the bottom a reflection of the top? So I'm going to talk a little bit about us. That's us. We're one of these. We're a mammal. And we express ourselves over a range of 100 billion in terms of our weight, from the shrew to the whale. The amazing thing is, even though they look different, they have completely different environments, they are actually, to an extraordinary degree of accuracy in terms of anything that you can measure about them, scaled versions of each other, including us. And I want to show you that immediately. This is the graph of the most fundamental quantity of any system, particularly an animal, but it's also the most fundamental quantity, ultimately, of Singapore and any other city. And how much energy does it take to keep the bloody thing going? That's called metabolic rate, and it's plotted here on the vertical axis against the mass of a bunch of organisms. And it's plotted logarithmically. I assume everybody knows what that means, but it's obvious from this graph. The coordinates go up by factors of 10. 1, 10, 100,000 for the metabolic rate, 1, 10, 100,000 for the weight. That's because you've got to get an elephant and a mouse on the same graph, and you have to go over an enormous range. So if you do that, you see something extraordinary. They all line up on a very simple straight line, approximately. And that is amazing because we believe in natural selection. We believe that every single one of these organisms has a unique history. It has evolved in its own unique environmental niche. Not only that, every organ in it, every genome, every cell type, every subsystem has evolved with its own unique history. So you would have expected, if you plotted almost anything like this, that the points would be all over this graph, reflecting the historical contingency of the evolution of each one of these organisms. But in fact, to a pretty good approximation, they all line up on the same line. And even more amazing is the slope of that line is, even if you thought they might scale like this, you might think at the most naive level that it would scale linearly, meaning that if you doubled the size of an organism, of course, you double the number of cells, you would double how much energy you need to keep them alive. Not the case at all. You don't want the slope of this is not 1, which that would be the case. The slope of this is 3/4, very closely, which means when you double the size, approximately, instead of needing twice as much energy, you only need 75% more. So as you get bigger, you get an increasing economy of scale in a highly systematic way. The bigger you are, the more efficient you are, the more efficient way that you use your cells and so on. So you are more efficient than your dog, but a horse is more efficient than you are. Okay. So that's kind of extraordinary, but even more extraordinary is that the same kind of scaling holds true for any physiological variable that you can measure, or anything that measures life history. So, for example, here's something mundane: heart rates versus body weight. The same thing. The slope of that is minus 1/4. Here's your brain, your very brain, your white matter to gray matter, the computing part versus the cables, so to speak, the processors versus the cables, and you can see an extraordinarily good scaling curve with a slope of 5/4. That's a little more fluctuations here. This is length of genes, genome lengths. Again, you see scaling, and the slope of this is very close to 1/4. And I could show you 50 to 100 more of these, and they all have exactly the same character. They all scale in this very simple way when plotted in this logarithmic fashion. And the slopes of the graphs are almost always some simple multiple of 1/4. So the kind of magic number of life is 4. Something special about the number 4 for the way all life is governed, all ecology is governed, and so on. So even lifespan, I worked this out. Lifespan, I should have shown the graph, has a slope, roughly speaking, there's a lot of variance in it, of 1/4, goes up by 1/4, but I just showed you heart rate decreases as 1/4, and those two things cancel themselves out, and this is the important point, so that the number of heartbeats in a lifetime is the same for that little shrew that sits on the palm of my hand as it is for the blue whale, which is almost as big as, well, it's much bigger than this auditorium. So there's something extraordinary about that, and we have this idea of big things living for slowly, but for a long time, and little things living very quickly for a very short time. The pace of life, systematically, about anything you can measure about rates, slows down the bigger you are. This is how. And the question is, where the hell did all this come from? Why is it the way it is? Why is it that plants and trees, which have a completely different evolved design than you and me, have essentially the same scaling laws as we do, as insects, fish, birds, cells, and so on? And the idea is that what is common among us all, despite appearances, despite the fact that a well is in the ocean and a tree grows in the earth and so on, despite all of that, one thing that we have in common, apart from the fact we're all made of cells, is that we are sustained by networks of all kinds. We are, if you think of it from this viewpoint, just a bunch of networks: your circulatory system, your renal system, your respiratory system, your bones, your neural system, and so on. And they all have a similar characteristic. They're all hierarchical, and there's some of them. That's you down there, and there. That's your brain down in the left. That's on the top right, is inside your cells. No, down bottom right is inside your cells, and the top right is the inside your mitochondria. And that's what you look like on the inside. You're this network, and it's an extraordinary network. And you can already see, you know, if you look at it a little bit, it looks a bit like a city in a way. It's transporting stuff and so forth. And you see also that it's kind of filling space, and that's a crucial thing for all of these. It has to go everywhere, this network. And so, I'm not showing any of the mathematics, any of the theory, or anything. I'm just telling you, you have to take my word, that you can erect a complete theory based on generic properties of networks, the idea being that those properties transcend design, and that out of those come all of the scaling laws, many, many more that I haven't shown you, including, by the way, how you scale within you, because these networks in you, how do you scale from your aorta down to your capillaries, or from your, what is this called, anyway, your windpipe, all the way down to the alveoli at the end of your lungs. And the theory explains all that, and it has quantitative predictions, and I'm not going to show you. There's a semi-infinite amount of data that's been compared to, and it agrees very well. But what I want to do, I just want to tell you that, because the talk is more about cities and so on. But I'm going to show you one example very quickly of this kind of scaling, which you do. Namely, you grew, and all of us went through this, we all scaled up. And I'm going to apply the ideas, the concepts of that theoretical framework to this. So you know how you grew, you ate, you metabolized the food, you sent that food through the networks. The network, in particular the circulatory system, delivers metabolites to cells. When it gets to cells, what does it do? It repairs damage. It replaces those that have died, so that's maintenance, and then it adds one. It adds cells, new cells, if you're in the growth phase. Okay. So there it is, that's just a picture, and there it is in English, roughly, in its simplest possible form. You allocate it between maintenance and growth, and I'm not going to write down all the equations and so on, but the theory, from the theory, you can derive mathematically an equation for the growth, and just as an example, that line, the solid line, is the prediction of the theory, and those are data points for us, well, us as a rat, and you see it's pretty damn good. And importantly, I'm going to come to several important points I want to make, the parameters that determine this are the same, the fundamental parameters are the same for all, certainly mammals, and essentially the same for all animals. parameters like the mass of the cell, how much energy you need to create a cell, the overall scale, the metabolic rate, and so on. And this comes from the constraints of the network, which also, of course, constrain metabolic rate to have this 3/4 scaling. But the second point I want to emphasize is that there's that growth. It's a bounded growth. It's sometimes called sigmoidal growth. You grow quickly at the beginning, and then you stop. And the reason you stop, when you go back and you look through the derivation, is because of the sublinear scaling, the economy of scale invoked in metabolism, driven by the behavior of the network, the constraints, the physics and mathematics of the network, which gives rise to that 3/4 power scaling law, 3/4 less than 1, I call sublinear. That is what says it should turn over and stop. So that's great, and indeed, here it is for a couple of, a couple of birds, a fish, and a cow, and you can, with the same parameters, you can determine any of them. And in fact, the theory, and I'm not going to belabor this, the theory tells you that if you rescale the mass and rescale the time in a very clever way determined by the theory, all those growth curves collapse to a single curve, and there is a kind of universality to growth. Everybody, when looked at through the lens of these reduced parameters, grows in the same way when you readjust accordingly, the theory telling you how to do that. So there it is, just for a small subsample. So that's very nice. And here it is when you add insects and colonies of insects, and you see some outliers here. And colonies are already starting to get a teeny weeny bit near social organization. And I just put this in for the hell of it, that you can also apply it to tumors, and it has been done by others applying the same theory to tumors to understand the growth of tumors. And just one tangential point to the whole talk is that one of the things the theory says, and is supported by the data, is that tumors stop growing. Despite this image, this idea that tumors exponentially grow and you eventually die, of course that's true. But in fact, if you live long enough, tumors would stop, which gives you a kind of interesting speculative strategy for attacking cancer. That is, if you can somehow manipulate the parameters, which are given the theories in terms of those parameters, if you can manipulate them for tumors, maybe it's okay to grow tumors. You just grow them, but they stop, but they only reach a tiny size, and so they're not, they don't end up okay, this is how tumors. So I just want to summarize this and then move to cities. So biology, from this viewpoint, it has these extraordinary scaling laws. They're highly nonlinear, but they're very systematic. They express an extraordinary economy of scale. The bigger you are, the less you need per capita. The pace of life systematically slows down the bigger you are. Growth stops at some stage, and by the way, that plays a critical role in the fact that life is incredibly resilient. We stop growing, and is one of the reasons why life has been around for several billion years. And also, I didn't say this, but that's also part of the theory, that you grow in this way and stop, and then you die. That's it. And all of this can be explained in terms of this sort of network theory. And what I want to now do is take this idea over to into the question of cities, and then, if I have time, a little bit into companies. Okay. So the first thing I just want to point out is that this kind of curve, which is beautiful for biology, and is the reason, in fact, I presume all of you must have been concerned in your life why it is you went on eating. When you were 8 years old, you kept growing, and your mommy and daddy told you to keep eating so you grow to be a big boy or girl. And then at some stage you stopped. You went on eating, you still go on eating, but you didn't grow any bigger. Except around them, but you didn't grow any bigger. And this explains it, and that's crucial in biology. But it's considered disastrous in socioeconomic systems. The President of the United States gets clobbered if he says the growth this quarter was only 1.2%, not 3%, as I'm sure you would be concerned here. Even though 1.2% is still exponential growth. And that's, whoops, there, that's the US GDP, always has to be doing that, onward and upward. The yellow is an exponential. By the way, just another side comment, you notice that it's exponential from, this was drawn from about 1870 onwards. You notice all those dips and bumps, all the crashes and all the rest are sort of irrelevant in the big picture. If you can go through, it just keeps going. And that's the paradigm. That's what we live in. That's what we believe in, and it goes on. Okay, and I want to examine some of the origins of this. Okay, let's move on. So the first question when we move into this is, are cities and companies, for that matter, scale versions of each other, and is there any universal behavior? So Singapore, needless to say, you're only too well aware of, is unique. You can't ask, it's not part of any urban system. It's the only place on the planet, basically. But in the United States, you can ask, is New York a scaled up Los Angeles, which is a scaled up Chicago, which is a scaled up Vicente, a tiny single town? Well, when you look at them, they look quite different. I mean, they have different histories, geographies. Los Angeles is spread out. New York has lots of skyscrapers and all the rest of it, and so on. And so it's not clear. On the other hand, when you think of biology, a whale is in the ocean, a giraffe has a long neck and an elephant a trunk, and we walk on 2 feet and the mouse scurries around. But in fact, to the kind of 80-90% level of anything you can measure, which is the only thing that's important here, we're all scale versions of one another. So the question is that true of cities despite the fact that they look different? And of course you can't argue about that. All you can do is look at data. So I want to show you data to show you the answer to that. And part of it is motivated, once we have this paradigm that we had in biology, by the fact that cities are, of course, network systems. There are roads and all the pipes and cables that you can't see. There's this extraordinary network, transport networks. This is something I don't know what I believe is Singapore. And of course, it's all supplied by networks. So networks play a crucial role. So you might think, gee whiz, maybe there's some possibilities we can apply the same ideas, the same paradigm. But I said earlier, and I pointed out, should have made a bigger point, but Shakespeare, of course, understood better than most of us that cities are not all these buildings and roads and all the rest. They really are people. That's what they are. And his people. This is a social network. Each one of those nodes is a person, and all those lines take them to people they're connected to, and so forth. So this is a classic social network, and that is what people, that's social interaction, and then cities, of course, have this. We're all connected in some way. But of course, there's another piece to it, and that is not only are we connected, we are modular. We are part of a family, we're part of maybe a group, part of a department, part of a business. In some way, we have modularity in these networks. And this is kind of a pictorial representation of the tension I talked, and the integration I talked about earlier, the physicality with the information, because these are networks of information. So here's the first kind of look at where the cities scale. I guess I just keep saying. And what is plotted here is something very mundane and simple. It's the number of petrol stations as a function of city size. It's plotted in the same way as that biology data was, logarithmically, going up by factors of 10. And for 4, this happens to be just for European countries. And what you see is it looks just like biology. There's a little more variance, but you can see that there's good evidence of scaling. Not only that, the scaling is sublinear, the slope is less than 1, not surprisingly, double the size of the city, you don't need twice as many gas stations. You have an economy of scale. But what is interesting is the slope of all these are sort of approximately the same. And the slope of those are not like biology, they're not 0.75, 3/4, they're much closer to 0.85. So, double the size of the city, you don't need twice as many gas stations, you only need, roughly speaking, 85% more. So that's kind of interesting. What is more interesting is that this was just 4, but if you look across all European countries, it looks just the same way. But it turns out if you look at any country across the globe, it's any nation, any urban system across the globe, it's the same. Latin American countries, China, Japan, and so on. They all look just like this. They all have slopes roughly 0.85. But what's even more interesting is that any infrastructural quantity you want to look at that you can measure, like the length of all the roads, the length of the electrical cables, the water lines, gas lines, whatever, all behave in exactly the same way, with this 15% saving every time you double. So that seems to be a bizarre, universal economy of scale that is manifested in urban systems across the globe. That's interesting. It's the physicality, the physical infrastructure of the city, but much more interesting is the real city, which is you and me, people. And so now I'm going to look at socioeconomic quantities. So these are quantities that did not exist on this planet, and for all we know, didn't exist in the universe until we started learning language and forming communities and ultimately cities. And now are things like wages on the top. Smart people, like everybody in this room, super creative people. And what you see is, again, there's good evidence of scaling, even though there's much more variance here than we saw in the biology. But what is really important here is that the slope of these is no longer less than 1, like the 3/4 or 0.85, it's bigger than 1, 1.12, 1.15. And what that says is the bigger you are, instead of having less per capita, you have more per capita. So the bigger the city systematically, you have higher wages per capita, more sexy, interesting people, creative people, professional people per capita, more ideas per capita. I feel like this is about closer to 1.2. More ideas, number of patents produced per capita, more crime per capita, more police per capita, more tax per capita, more construction per capita, more debt per capita, more restaurants per capita. Anything that involves sexy interaction between people, buzz of a city, increases with city size. And there's a graph that we put together just to show a few of them laid on top of one another. And you can see there's quite a bit of, as I say, noise in the system, so to speak, but what you see is they all have pretty much the same kind of slope. And we have looked at data from everywhere we can get it from around the globe, as I said earlier, Latin American cities, Colombia, Chile, Mexico, Brazil, and so forth, China, Japan, European cities. The cities that are missing from this study, by the way, are Africa and India, only because we can't get credible data. And we'd love to get it, and maybe we will one day. Anyway, there's, so, what's the next slide? Yes, let me say this. No, I'm going to miss this now. So here's in English what those say. It's the good, the bad, and the ugly. If you double the size of the city, on the average, there's a systematic increase of all these socioeconomic quantities, all the good things, income, wealth, patents, colleges, creative people, restaurants, I could have put down. But all the bad, well, I'm not sure, please are neutral, maybe. But disease, AIDS, the flu, crime, social, all of these increase by about 15% every time you double. And at the same time, you save 15% on all the infrastructure. Big cities are good, and bigger cities are better from this viewpoint. Not about individual lives, but from just this viewpoint, they're better in the sense, and no wonder people flock to the cities that we're having this exponential urbanization because people are very good at ignoring all these things, and they get attracted to all these things. Opportunity, job opportunity, and all the good things that they see about cities are attractive. They ignore the other, so that's very good, considered very good and attractive at the individual level, and this is very good at the collective level. So the question then is, this data from around the world, how the hell could it be that cities in Portugal, cities in Germany, France, Chile, Colombia, China, Japan, United States, all scaling the same way? There wasn't a Congress in 1848 to decide how we should construct not just cities but the entire urban system. What is underlying this? What is the universal mechanism that cities that essentially had no interaction during their evolution ended up, in terms of an urban system, having the same common behavior? So then we go back to answer that. We go back to the one thing that is common to all cities. So it's again like the biology, they may look quite different, but in fact, the one commonality is that all cities actually have people in them, and they're there for people. And I emphasize that because one of the things I've learned, and there may be people in this room that are urban planners, urban economists, urban geographers, one of the things I learned as I started learning this field was that cities primarily in the professional literature are thought of as bricks and mortar. And people are sort of added in there somehow, like you have salt and pepper, rather than cities are people, and we have constructed this amazing phenomenon in order to facilitate our lives and in particular our interactions. So that's just a little polemical statement, but the question is why? So it's people, and the idea is that the social networks of people, the way people interact, are the same across the globe at this kind of level of granularity. The fact that there are different cultures, histories, and geographies, that we look different, and so forth, at this level are irrelevant. They will all have essentially identical biology. We have identical genes, effectively, and that is manifested in the way we interact. We have pretty much the same number of children, especially, that depends on development a little bit, but we have pretty much the same number of children, and we pretty much, there's studies, just to give you a sense, anthropological studies, psychological studies, where people claim that across the globe, if you ask how many people is the average person have powerful interactions with, love or hate, I suppose, usually considered the family. So how many people is that on the average? Across the globe, it's always between 4 and 6 everywhere. It's not 150 Facebook friends. It's 5 roughly people, usually your family, parents, children, lovers, whatever, could be very close friends, and so on. And then there's a kind of hierarchy. There's maybe 15 people that you're very good friends with, but maybe not intimate, as you would be with those 5 and so on. So there's a structure that seems to have a kind of universal quality to it that transcends culture, even though those cultures often manifest themselves quite differently. And the idea is, the conceptual idea is that when you put this into mathematics, that's what's actually being manifested here. And amazingly, that is determining why our cities look the way they are. Kind of amazing idea. Okay. So, That's what I'm saying here. So we have to test this theory. I don't have time to go through any of the mathematics and so on, but let's try to test this theory. So here is this graph of this 1.15. And the idea is, the reason that all these different things, income, GDP, crime, and patents, which seem completely different, have all lined up with the same slope, is because they all are derived from all of us talking to one another, interactions between each other, have led to all these things. You can't commit, well, I suppose you can commit some crimes. Almost all crime invokes interaction. I didn't put disease. Disease typically involves interaction. Getting income does, getting a GDP does, making patents. All these involve something to do with social interaction. Therefore, and that's why the claim is they're all the same, and they're the same across the globe. But how would you test this? So the idea is, if you could measure the degree of interaction, social interaction as a function of city size, it should just follow this. So how do you do that? Well, one of the great things that has happened with the IT revolution is the curse of the iPhone, or not the iPhone, the cell phone, the mobile. The iPhone is a particular instance. But it's the curse of the mobile phone that all of you, I'm sure, carry. And indeed, since everybody carries it, I'm sure you're very well aware of this, Big Brother knows pretty much where you are, what you've been doing, and who you've been talking to. So, I presume you all know the telephone companies keep records of when you start a call, when you finish a call, where you are, and who you're talking to, and where they are. So that's a record. So there's billions and billions of these. Well, in collaboration with friends and colleagues at MIT, in the Media Lab, they got hold of this data, this mobile phone data, and we can look at that data and analyze it and ask from it, just count the number of interactions. Interactions here being defined, I call you, and within some given period of time, which we define as a week, a month, 6 weeks, 6 months, you call me back. We just define that as you and I have a relationship. And then we just count those numbers of those relationships, because we have the record of everybody calling, and we assume that's representative. And just plot it as a function of the city size in which you made the call. And there's the answer down on the right, and you can see it follows, it scales with city size, and it scales just like these do, with roughly speaking the same slope. And there are two countries there, Portugal and the United Kingdom, and they're lying on top of one another. So it's quite extraordinary, and it gives credence to this idea that social networks underlie. I'm going to miss this out. And I'm going to do a couple other things on this. So, with this idea of cell phone data, since we know everything, when you think about it, it's extraordinary. You know what it's like? It's like if you had a little detector on every molecule in this room. It's like, oops. Every molecule in this room, you knew what its speed was, which direction it was moving in, what other molecule it collided with, and so on. Useless for physics. Absolutely useless for physics. But extraordinary if you want to understand how the cities are working, this mishmash of a city. So here's the first thing that you realize, which I did not appreciate actually. So, when you think of the city, and when many people bring up metaphors of the city, I talked about the biological one, but people often have kind of cauldrons or reactors. You look at Singapore and there's all this stuff going on, everybody's moving around and it's kind of crazy. Everything's moving. Actually, if you look at all those, when you think about it, you look at all those journeys, almost everybody is going from their home to their job and back, or from their home to the store and back, or their home to the cinema and back, or the home to pick up their kids' school and back. But they're all very specific journeys there and back. So that's an extraordinary structure. Furthermore, most of those people are trying to do it in as short a time as possible and in as straight a route as possible. Well, if you take all those ideas and you put them into mathematics, you can prove something that's quite surprising, and that is that the flux of people, the number of people, that's that Q there, as a function. So, let me back off a second. Take Singapore, which I'm going to show you, and you choose some piece, some spot, some little area, tiny area in Singapore. Where I have no idea where we are, but you choose this. And then you ask, how many people are coming in this area from a distance R away so many F times a week? So it could be once a week, once a month, once a year, from a distance of 1 kilometer, 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers. And the theory says that should just go as the inverse square. That's what this says. This is the inverse square. So this is the data. And I'm not going to go into this in detail, but if you look at the top left, what is plotted there is that quantity, that flux of people. That's the distance on the horizontal axis, and those slopes are for different frequencies. So it's different points of the different frequencies. And in fact, they all follow this inverse square, as does this one, where it's plotted times R times F, the frequency times the distance. And you can see beautifully, there's the theory, the straight line. And on the right is quite astounding, really. What's plotted is that same quantity versus this quantity R times F. And the theory is that dotted line. And on it are Boston, Dakar in Senegal, Lisbon in Portugal, and Singapore in Singapore. And what you see is they all follow the same this inverse square. It's kind of astounding. So this, what looks like chaos and mishmash and so on, has extraordinary regularity to it. So this is Boston. You can't look at it, just look. And each one of those lines is that inverse square. And these are different parts of the Boston area, showing you just choose these points and then do this analysis. Look at them, all lined up. And here's you. You are unquestionably a part of this data. This is Singapore. And what you see, Singapore also updates it, it's not quite, if you actually look at it in detail, it's not quite as good as Boston, but it's damn good. Now, it turns out that there are some exceptions to this, and this is very important in science. If you see an exception, you can either say the whole thing's rubbish, or rather say no, it's there, but there's a good reason for that. And I want to show you two in Boston. There are only two we could find. One was the airport, the other was the stadium, the big football stadium. And of course they're reasonable because they're very special places. People don't sort of organically go there. It's not representative of the city. They're very special. But here's what's weird. The only place in Singapore that violates this, even though it scales, is on the right, Raffles Place. Now I don't know if it's because there's some great big bloody mall there or something, some of these horrific Singapore things that attract all kinds of people, I don't know. But something is weird about that, and it's kind of interesting, but it tells you something about the dynamics of mobility of Raffles Place. It's very important. It should be understood so that you can manipulate or do whatever you do to either make it line up or understand maybe this is better, I don't know. But this is now a window onto understanding something about what's going on in that area. But more importantly, knowing this is a fantastic tool in helping design cities in terms of development and mobility and so on. Okay, let me move on quickly. I started late. Oh, I should finish very quickly. I'm getting to I'll be as quick as I can. I mentioned the sublinear behavior of biology gave rise to bounded growth but also to the pace of life slowing down. Turns out the network theory that gives rise to superlinear scaling, the bigger you are, the more per capita, makes life speed up. Everything goes faster the bigger you are. And there's just one amusing example. On the left is biology. Look at the one on the right is walking speed versus city size, showing this systematic increase. There's quite a lot of variance there, but you can see it's pretty good and it agrees pretty well with the theory. You should walk faster because you're somehow part of this network and you're conscious, subliminally conscious of people. And indeed, this increase in city size has some amusing consequences. This is something that happened just a couple of months ago. Good, I've just been told 5 minutes, I promise. And in Liverpool, people were getting pissed off that people weren't walking fast enough in the downtown. You know, they're getting in the way because the speed of life is speeded up so much. And so they Liverpool initiated a fast lane for walking, for pedestrians. And it's created a whole bit, many cities now are considering this innovation. It's pathetic, but it's true. Okay, so I now want to take these ideas and take them into growth of cities and some of the implications. It's the same kind of idea. You have all this stuff coming in, both the physical aspects, resources, energy, and so forth, but you're also creating and so on. So I'm not going to go into any details, but that goes into maintaining the city, keeping the streets up and the pipes and so on, and then growing it. So that's just a very simplistic way of talking about it. We can make this quite fancy and sexy. And you remember, when we took that equation, that's what it gave for biology. This is what it gives for cities driven by superlinear behavior coming from the social network, which invokes this continuous positive feedback mechanism of social interactions. And I've just done a cartoon version, and you can see this exponential growth, which is what we see. So that's great. This whole thing is consistent. The theory is nice, but it has a dire consequence. The dire consequence is that what it says is that the system cannot continue. It must collapse at some stage, and that's what that dotted line is, and that tells you how it collapses. That's very bad. We want to avoid that, and the way we have avoided it is to recognize that when you grow like this, you are growing within some paradigm, some innovative paradigm. So I'm going to talk on the big picture about the economy rather than specific cities. I won't have time to talk about that, so let me talk in the bigger picture. So you discover iron, whenever it was, 20,000 years ago, or 10,000. You discover iron. That changes things. That changes a whole bunch of things. More recently, you discover coal. That starts the Industrial Revolution. And even more recently, we invent computers. Changes things. Discover IT. So each one of those major innovations, so to speak, resets the clock. So it tells you how you can avoid collapse. You're going along this curve, life is getting faster, and you would collapse. So somewhere along there, you better reset the clock by inventing computers or whatever. And that means that you would start again and go on. Of course, you would eventually collapse for the same reason. So you better make another innovation, a new innovation. And so it goes. You have to keep going. So there's a kind of theory. If you want to have open-ended growth, which is what we have demanded, then you have to be continuously on innovation cycles, which you're familiar with. You have to be resetting the clock or reinventing yourself in some way. But there's another catch. The catch is that not only as you go along one of these curves and you're getting bigger, is life getting faster, but the time between those innovations is getting shorter, is what the theory says. So something that might have taken 100 years to develop 500 years ago now only takes 15 years. And the next innovation should take less than 15 years, maybe 10 or 12 years. So what it says is if we want to continue on this trajectory, and we believe this, this speculation from this, that we have to have in the next 15 to 20 years another major innovation comparable to the IT revolution if we're going to maintain this open-ended growth. So that's the idea. And I just showed, this is not me, I have no idea who this person is, but I found this on the web because it illustrates it, and it's a similar thing, and I don't know where he did it before, I did it before my work. But and here's another version of it. This is the innovations, and what you see, major innovation, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go here. This is time to the next, so life, so look up here, life took several billion years to evolve, and it happened several billion years ago. That's up here. Down here, this happened just recently, it's hardly any time, and it took a very short time to develop. So you have this continually piling up, and the theory predicts that red line. And I'm not going to go into it, but there. So, and this is actually applied to specific cities. I don't have time to go into it, other than the right-hand side, that's New York City. That's analyzing the growth of New York City. And just to give you a sense, very quickly, is that if you look at the time between these various little perceived bumps in it, these little scalloped events, then they're supposed to be getting closer, and you can see, as you look, they are indeed, there's evidence that they're getting, these oscillations are getting closer and closer. Okay, so, can I take 2 more minutes maybe? What do you think? I want to do one other thing because it's relevant for Singapore, and that is, you know, these scaling curves represent some average idealized city. But every city, of course you saw those fluctuations, each city either overperforms or underperforms relative to it, when you look at one of those scaling curves. So you can rank cities on how well they've overperformed. Are they getting more patents than they should for a city of their size, or less patents for a city of their size? Are they having too many edge cases, or not enough edge cases, or whatever? So that's what we plotted here. That line, that horizontal line, is, if you like, exactly on the scaling curve, and this is for patents, for patent production, and you can then rank cities. Corvallis, Oregon is the most, in that year, is the most innovative city in the United States. The least innovative was Abilene, Brownsville, Texas, and San Jose was innovative because of Silicon Valley, but you can gauge them, and you can also look at how they changed from the 1950s all the way through to the present. This is how that metric changed, and you can see they don't change very much for an individual city. Cities are very hard to change. And of course, this is incredibly useful for gauging the success and the performance of cities. And the big issue for Singapore, of course, is that you're not part of an urban system, so you have nothing to normalize yourself against. You should be normalizing yourself, if it wasn't for a historical accident, to Kuala Lumpur and all those other places over there. You should be part of that system, but you're not. You're independent, you're yourself, and you're unique. And but what you have become is part of a global urban system, but no one knows what that is. How can you compare unless you know it is? Is it a global urban system? What is it? All the rubbish about, oh, New York, Paris, London, Shanghai, these are global cities. What does that mean? What does that mean? We know what it means when we say Chicago is part of the US urban system. So this is very important. So I've been talking today, urging Singapore to start to think about what the hell does it mean to be a global city? Is there a global urban system? And where do we sit? Are we overperforming, which appears to be the case? Or maybe we're underperforming in something, and what is our trajectory? And I'm going to stop here because I've gone on too long. But part of this theory also has built into it, one thing I do want to show is this. One of the things that we can do with this theory is look at the diversity of cities in terms of their size as an urban system. So, that's, the top is New York, and these are various cities. And we've done 465 US cities, and what you see is what it is how many businesses are there at a given time. So if you look at the top one, that purple thing is the largest number of offices of any business. What is it in New York? It's physicians, doctors. That's the biggest business in New York. And the next one is, I think, lawyers and so forth. And then there's another city, Chicago, and that's what we've done. We've analyzed this in great detail. So here they are. But here's what's amazing. Even though each city has its own spectrum of businesses, if you try to put this into a theory, the theory says if you know what to do, all of these collapse to one curve. All the same. They all have the same distribution of jobs. All of them. They're all line on one, and we understand that. And we can do all this, and we can then assess cities, and you can start talking about the future of cities, and you can even predict what the trajectory of lawyers will be in Phoenix, Arizona from this. Well, you can't do that with Singapore. You can't do anything with Singapore unless you bullshit, frankly. Unless you say, oh, look at Mexico City, look at Tokyo, and so on. But you can't, it's comparing, it's not even comparing apples and oranges. It's comparing apples with, I don't know, mice. Okay, so I'm going to finish this. I will finish here. The major part that I left out is about businesses. We've done a great deal of work on businesses and asked the businesses scale. Is Walmart scaled up, small business and so on. And from that we've understood questions about something about the dynamics of businesses, structure of businesses, but importantly the mortality of businesses, which I started to talk about at the beginning of the talk. And just by the way, so you know that if you look at US publicly traded companies, because that's the only data we can get, and you ask what is the half-life of a company that is already posted on the US stock exchange, so it's already gone through its initial childhood, so to speak. The mean life, the half-life is about 10 years. Half of the companies that post on the exchanges in the United States are dead in less than 10 years. Well, very, very few companies last more than 50 years. 100 years is rare, 200 is extremely rare, and 400 is few. But they all die. So one of the things is to construct a theory, just like that of cities, and to be able to predict when Google will disappear, and Microsoft, because they surely will, just like the ones I showed earlier, like TWN. Okay, I'll finish there. I'm not too long, and I apologize. We were supposed to have a discussion. Okay. Do I come down? Oh.
Thank you, Professor West, for the insightful lecture. We'll now be proceeding to the moderated panel discussion and Q&A session. During the Q&A, we ask that you please state your name and organization before asking questions or making comments. You may raise your hand and our staff will walk to you with microphones. I would now like to invite Mr. Aaron William to join Prof. West on stage for the moderated discussion and Q&A. Aaron, please. Oh, you're here.
I do that sometimes, I jump the gun. Sorry, Zuma. Thanks. And thanks very much, Jeff, for that encyclopedic examination of so many different things. I was very struck by the fact that we often differentiate between engineering systems, those cold, rigid things, and ecological systems. And I think what you showed us is that cities are both at the same time. There are certain universal laws that they subscribe to, and yet they're also dynamic and living and breathing all at the same time. I was thinking we could take maybe a couple of questions at a time. We've got about 40 minutes and it's 5:30. So maybe a couple of questions at a time. I've tried 3 before and they're often a bit difficult for the kind of level of material that we've got. So maybe 2 will enable us to get through a good number. And usually there's a problem with getting the first question, so I'll just go straight to the second and see who...
Can I just add one thing? I wanted to not a disclaimer exactly, but I purposely tried to make this talk provocative.
You're expecting some pushback,
Yeah,
right?
I was a bit hyperbolic at times.
Great. Great. Yeah, we've got one question here and then leave it in after that. Yeah.
Would you say that Detroit deviated from your curve? Your exponential
Could you
curve?
let us know who you are as well?
Okay, my name is Mok Yuan Ping. That curve that you had where all the different American cities followed the same pattern, the exponential increase. Would you say that Detroit completely deviated from that because it's been contracting?
Should we take a couple more? Is that sorry? So curve in Detroit. Yes, sir. Yeah. Just in front here. Gentleman in the white. Can you pass him the mic? Okay, the mic is coming your way. So we've got the curve in Detroit. Is it an exception? Yeah.
Professor, you are an optimist because from the newspapers I read and from the news I listen over the radio, there are many prophets of doom. We have increasing carbon footprint in the world, we have global warming, we have industries dying, we have commodity prices plunging, and yet your talk is very, very optimistic about the future of the world. And I'm very familiar with this American phrase, the death of cities. Why cities die? And every now and then I come across the same phrase. And indeed our politicians in Singapore also mutter the same phrase and suggest that if we don't stop inventing, which you correlated very well, then we will surely have a different rate of growth. So I'm quite I'm quite encouraged by your talk, but how much of it is asymptotic theory? Because you tend to cover more than just the short lifespan of Detroit. But over the next 500 years, would you say that Detroit will survive? Or some crime-infested city in Mexico will survive?
Okay, so that's the basis of the optimism, right, essentially?
Yes.
Yeah. Great, and Leeman, you had a question as well. We want to get you a mic, I think, otherwise not everyone else can hear you. You would like to use mine, actually.
It's not a very complicated question, it's just an elaboration of a point. I'm very interested to know what singularity means for cities. I mean, we hear singularity being discussed a lot in science of the universe and so on. So what does it mean when you reach singularity in cities?
Can I ask the question?
Can we do yours in the next round? We'll get to you, I promise. Yeah. We'll go to you first after this in the next round. But why don't we try these three first? Detroit and the curve, causes for your optimism and singularity for cities.
I'm going to come back to this, but I don't think anyone has ever called me an optimist. Detroit. Yes, so, Detroit gets a huge amount of press, and for good reason, and it is too bad that I didn't get to the company stuff, because Detroit has suffered because it has become inflexible, and part of that was due to its lack of diversity, which is associated with this curve we talked about. And indeed, Detroit is an outlier on that diversity curve. The resilience of the system is closely related, to some extent anyway, to its being diverse and being able to sort of adapt to changes. But having said that, Detroit also gets a bit of a bad rap because we use the word Detroit for the political city, But Detroit is actually a big, a contiguous metropolitan area. And so if you ask, what was, I don't remember, these numbers are probably wrong, but the spirit of them is correct. The population of Detroit in the 50s, when the automobile industry was booming, was over 2 million people, Detroit City. It's now, I don't know, less than 1 million, 900,000, I don't know the exact number. So it's down by well over 50%. And indeed, the center of Detroit is, a bit like a wasteland. However, if you look at Detroit as a metropolitan area, a whole continuous area, because the city is just some arbitrary line that was drawn at some stage. But if you look at the entire metropolitan area, its population in 1950 was, 3.8 million people. It's now like 4.3 million people. It's gone up. And Detroit, if we look, I showed the other graph I showed very quickly at the end was the performance of cities relative to the baseline, which is sort of what you were asking about a little bit. If you look at that, Detroit's performances as a metropolitan area have not changed very much, actually. What has happened, in fact, is that the action shifted as it started to decay in the middle. The outside ring blossomed, and it has a very productive pharmaceutical industry, high tech, and so forth. It's got a lot of impetus from the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor and so forth. So that has worked extremely well. And what's happening now, just beginning, is the reversal, and people beginning to migrate back into the city. So much so that I would say that if any of you have a lot of money and you want to be rich in 25 years, buy in the center of Detroit. So that's my answer to Detroit. Optimism. Well, I didn't say, I left the conclusions of that bit about growth to the listener, so to speak, to the audience. Because what is very clear is that you can't sustain apart from resources and anything else, you cannot sustain that continuous innovation cycle, because it's not that you can't innovate, but you have to do it faster and faster. And indeed we know it, all the metrics of innovation follow those curves, in fact. I just showed that big one, but any of the more detailed ones I could have shown also follow that. And so I would say, my own conclusions from this work are quite the opposite. It's quite pessimistic. It's that this system is destined for collapse unless we make a complete revolutionary change to the whole system. Because if you take the argument sort of reductio ad absurdum, that you're going to eventually have to innovate every year, a major revolution, innovation, every year. So that's kind of crazy. So this idea that you can have this continuous open-ended growth just is not conceivable. So I'm actually a pessimist and don't think the system will survive, because it's as if, each one of those curves is the increasing pace of life. So it's as if you're on a treadmill that is going faster and faster. But then, that's bad enough. But then, every once in a while, you have to jump from that treadmill to another treadmill that's going even faster. And you have to make that series of jumps faster and faster. So it's kind of like a double acceleration. And it's hard not to see that, the socioeconomic system won't have a heart attack. something very serious will happen. And of course, what I think, this is all speculation. My speculation is that it will manifest itself, not in the kinds of things I was talking about, but in social unrest. That social unrest will begin to get more and more serious, and as various segments of population around the world find themselves caught in this phenomenon that they can't keep up, they're not keeping up, and so forth. So I think that's, this is tangential to it, but, I'm an old man now, and I find adapting to this stupid idea that my computer every 2 years or 3 has to change, and I have to learn a new system, and all my old files are useless unless I do this, my iPhone doesn't. It's completely nuts. My inbox, I delete at some extraordinary rate, and I answer slowly because I don't like to write, because I'm old, I like to write letters in my email. I don't like to write, great idea, send it back. I like to explain, I saw, which is totally, it's no longer, it has to be tweeted, so to speak. So but that's the way it is, and I'm not adapted to that, and I can't. I don't want to even, definitely don't want to. Each one of us feels this. My inbox just grows and grows. Doesn't matter how many messages I delete and respond to. It just keeps growing. It's like these damn curves. And so that's just some teeny, stupid, little, tiny piece, but it's indicative of this whole phenomenon. And I should say, by the way, personally, at a personal level, since you brought up the word optimism, I'm an optimist. I'm basically believe in human beings. I believe that, good will win over evil. The only thing that's truly important in life is love. So I'm a very optimistic, positive person. And I'm sort of like, in the United States, I'm a little like a right-wing Republican. That is, it's like, all this science and all this stuff, it doesn't matter, we'll get through all that. Somehow it's all going to vanish. Then, of course, I become myself, my scientific self, and it's completely the opposite. Because what these equations are telling you, and strongly supported by the data, is that without some fundamental change, the system will collapse. The open-ended growth paradigm, which brought us all the wonderful things around us that we love, just is not sustainable unless something fundamental changes. And by the way, while we're on it, and I'm rambling on, is that had we been thinking along these lines 75 years ago, we might have been able to do something about it. I'm afraid the big issue is not that we can't make change, it's that we can't make it fast enough. That's my concern, to be honest, rather than it's impossible to do it. It's simply, we're right at the edge of the cliff. So I'm a pessimist.
And yet, right, we Republicans are trying to have all sorts of fundamental change happen right now, but that's not for today's lecture, right? Singularity for cities.
Singularity, yes.
I'm
sorry,
I get into lots of other questions.
Let's see. So those equations, the growth equations for cities, because of this superlinear scaling coming from social networks giving continuously positive feedback, building up, that gives rise to this open-ended growth. That these have built into them something that we call a finite time singularity. And a finite time singularity simply means, in English, that the system, whatever we're plotting, could be GDP, could be the number of patents, one of these metrics, that in some finite time has to go to infinity, which is crazy, exponential. means that you go to infinity, but in an infinite time, so you never get there. But these equations tell you that the solution, and that's what the data supports, is that you would get to infinity at some finite time. That's what the finite time, that's the singularity. And then the system collapses when it gets close to that. So the point is that you have to avoid that. And of course we do avoid, as I said, we avoid it by resetting the clock, by innovating, by reinventing ourselves, doing all the things that we do, just in terms of, so to speak, naturally. And at the same time, we naturally speed up. So, by the way, thinking of time, you know this interesting pseudo-fact, it's not a real fact, that there seems to be this interesting innate quality to human beings that we spend 1 hour a day traveling. That's all we can deal with. So that set the size of cities in the past. You could walk, or even large villages, 5 kilometers. Walk 5 kilometers an hour. So if you go there and back, that's 5 kilometers. And of course, so what is interesting about this is that as we innovated and made vehicles that could go faster, instead of saving time, which is what you think you would do, we didn't. We just moved further away. Okay? And so the city grows. That's the idea. This is not my idea. A man named Marchetti, two people did this. And so there's this kind of expansion of the city in order to accommodate time. So, it's a very interesting phenomenon, the way we try to accommodate increase in speed. That's just a pseudo-fact.
Great. Second round of questions. We've got a few now. Let's take Lena first. Okay, we've got his question at the back. Yeah. And then Lena after that. And then
Dr. West, can I ask you a question about your superlinearity and your sublinearity? I think it's not so much mapped to city or organisms, but more like superlinearity is really related to an open system, and your sublinearity is really related to a closed system. So come back to Singapore like a global city. Instead of hitting your singularity, your remedy is to do innovation. But a place like Singapore, a true global city, can we escape this paradigm by just interconnecting? Go out and do trading or foreign relationship. Can I ask another question?
all right.
Okay, a very simple one. Now related to organism, like a human being. Take an example of Stephen Hawking. He's more machine than man. So his interconnection, his networking that's supporting life is more like if his machines work and we can put a lot of machines there, can that actually defeat your paradigm? In other words, it can live indefinitely because all we need to do is to support the interconnection to his brain. A corollary to this is that, like Terminator, we put smart prostheses or stem cells. We can keep on increasing our interconnection, so to speak. So it's not a closed system, it becomes an open system. Like Singapore would be if you are a global city and keep on interconnecting. So 2 questions there. Thank you.
2 questions on the same theme, actually, right? The themes of interconnection.
Open and close.
Open and close. Yeah. Great. Thank you, Lena.
Got a rambling set of questions here. Fairly It's interrelated, number one, and that is we're all governed by our genes in the sense that our DNA decides what we can cope with or not cope with. And you talk about innovation going up, but I mean, we are limited by what we can adapt and change. So that's one. And the other thing is that the history of human beings is such that it's been so many millions of years, and we are surrounded by biodiversity. And with this changing society, we've got, concrete environment. We are not connecting with what we grew up with and, or evolved with. So it actually, with the innovation, it still doesn't address that biological characteristic of ours. So when the third, very much related to it, it's all related in the sense that Jared Diamond wrote about the collapse of, nations, and basically, you've been governed by also limitation of our resources. So many cities just don't thrive because we, went to our limits. So basically, I want to bring back this question, and that is, how would a city be more biophilic than not to survive? Would a city, if it is biophilic, loving nature, being able to connect nature, help us to survive better? Thank you.
Given that that's the environment we're adapting to. Great. Raymond?
Hi, Raymond from Google LP. Professor, fantastic presentation. Very quick. Sorry. Private equity venture capital guys. Anyway, retired already and now I'm even more busy than ever. I met you in NTU sometime back on quite a few occasions. I would like to ask questions whether are we able to determine what will be a reasonable optimal size of the city, which make it extreme. I think that's great, because I think that what we need to do is to have some lead indication to see whether are we reaching the melting point or can we do something. I think you mentioned that. Related to that, with technology, are we able to flip the coin and say, actually I would love to live outside in the rural, but I just come to the city for fun. That means the city is basically a place where we have coffees, chat, and can do work and do every other thing. So I'm just trying to imagine how can we make our living even more tolerable. Thanks.
Great. So super and sublinearity, open and closed systems, interconnections. One set of themes. Biophilic cities, do they survive better? And is there a number of cities, right? Kind of optimal size. Yeah.
Well, good questions, all of them. And they all involve speculation. They all involve speculation, all of them. They're all speculative and some words sort of science fiction-y and so forth. It's not quite that it's, I wouldn't say open and closed. I mean, an open system is superlinear. I mean, that's, I agree with it remains, depends what you mean by open. So, for example, I have a very technical way of thinking of open and closed, and that's in terms of thermodynamics. The planet is an open system. This planet, Earth, is an open system in the sense that it gets energy from the sun continuously. And that's why life could develop and be sustained and so forth. It's great. It's been extraordinarily successful until it changed. Part of it changed. And it changed, 200 years ago. Something dramatic changed because even though human beings, we evolved with other animals and we evolved just like animals. I mean, if you look at all those, if I showed you these 50 to 100 scaling curves for animals, and you took human beings, then we fit, of course, perfectly on it as a, but this goes, I'm going to come back to this for your question, we fit perfectly on it in terms of, our various physiological and life history events and so forth. We're just what we should be. Our metabolic rate is what it should be, our hearts beat the rate they should, we live as long as we should, blah, blah, blah. So, then we discovered language, we made cities, but we were still supported primarily by the sun, most of us on the planet, until 200 years ago. Some of us weren't, because we discovered we could burn wood. That changed things a little bit. But when we discovered coal, and we discovered stored energy, and then oil, we changed from an open system to a closed system. You know, we no longer, the sun plays almost no role, I mean, relatively speaking, in running most of the urban aspects of the planet. It does, of course, in terms of our agriculture. But in terms of, you know, the urban side of the equation, we're now a closed system. But that doesn't stop the city behaving superlinearly. You know, we have to get, but what it does do is that it completely changes the thermodynamics of the system. And that, in fact, is one of the reasons that we put ourselves at risk by, you know, by having a closed system rather than going back to, which is one of the potential solutions, renewable energy by using the sun. So there is the one-to-one correspondence. I mean, there are two different concepts, in my opinion. There's the concept of open versus closed, and there's the concept of sublinear, economies of scale, versus superlinear, increasing returns to scale. So there's that. Now, you also brought up this very interesting question, which I'm going to translate differently. You took this weirdo Hawking thing that many people believe in, you know, we're all going to be cyborgs and so on. Well, maybe that's true. It's not impossible, obviously, but at the moment, you know, we barely understand anything about how the brain works. So it seems to be chutzpah in the extreme to think that, you know, it's going to be just taking my MacBook Air and plugging it into my ears and into my brain, and then I'm going to be something, you know, it's going to be nuts, obviously. But that's the image. But maybe it could happen. I'm not ruling it out. It's just simply that it's obviously a huge leap, enormous leap. However, it does bring up some extremely interesting questions, speculative questions, one of which, and I'll make it much more modest, but it was implied in what you said, and that is that, you know, maybe the discovery, the invention and discovery of IT, and the fact that we could communicate instantly and across enormous distances now globally, maybe that's the way out of this. That's, you know, the IT revolution. It represents that we, in our kind of stumbling way, have figured out the solution without realizing it by, you know, inventing mobile phones and the internet and so on. And I must tell you, when I first did all this work, that's what I thought. I thought, my God, isn't that fantastic? Marvelous. I mean, there's no real problem. But you know, then I started to do much more reading about innovations of the 19th century. And what I learned, which is only my opinion, or that's my interpretation, is that the innovations of the 19th century, relatively speaking, were much greater impact than the innovations we have now. Think of what the train did, opening up this. You know, most people on this planet, most human beings, didn't move more than a few kilometers. Their whole bloody lives, you know, they stayed very close. But once you had that kind of transportation, you could move serious distances. You could move on a horse and miles and so on, but you couldn't. But until the train came, you couldn't move vast distances. No wonder, you know, you couldn't have the United States, this vast territory, you know, all interconnected. So that had a truly profound impact. But then, you know, the telephone was invented. My God, you know, that was already, you could start talking to someone in real time, you know, over vast distances. The transatlantic cable was laid already in the 19th century. So, you know, these had profound effects socially and politically. And what did they end up doing? They didn't change any of this. What they did, they sped up life. That's all. They did. Everything just got faster and faster. And my belief is that the IT revolution is doing exactly the same. It's just made everything so much faster. And by the way, when I was a little boy, a young boy, and there were lots of futurists in the late 40s and 50s. I was born in 1940. So in the 50s, there were all kinds of futurists, because it was post-Second World War, optimism was beginning, and people were very much struck by innovation. And I think I had maybe at the end of this talk, I don't remember if I put it in, but people like John Maynard Keynes, the great economist, I have quotes from him and from Charles Darwin, Sir Charles Darwin, the grandson of the Charles Darwin, both saying that the biggest challenge in the future is how are we going to cope with all of the spare time we have. People, you only need a few people working, they said 50 hours a week, because that was the work week, in order to, make machines and innovate. But everybody else, I don't know, what are they going to do? They'll have, you can work for maybe productively for 15 hours or 20 hours. What are we going to do? We have to invent something, that's a huge issue. That was a huge issue. I remember that as a boy. And that's why I did some work to go back and find the various papers that these eminent people wrote. Well, they were completely wrong. They were exactly wrong. We don't have any time for anything, as far as I can tell. Now, you could, of course, say maybe they were right in the sense that the way we solve the problem, that we have so much time, is invent all the rubbish that we do. Facebook and Twitter and the internet and all the other crap that we have to deal with that takes up the email, that completely, most of it is rubbish. So maybe you could, I'm just giving an interpretation, I'm not saying I believe all that. That's there. You could think of it like Marx did, as religion is the opiate of the people. Facebook, Twitter, email, and all the rest is the opiate of 21st century people. It's keeping us occupied so that we don't have revolutions or whatever we're supposed to be doing.
There's a nice segue, sorry, Jeff, I'll let you finish.
Sorry. Yeah.
No. I was just going to say, there's a nice segue between what you just talked about and Nina's question, actually, which is to say, is there some solution to that in a more biophilic city?
That's also another question, I thought a very interesting question, because one of the interesting things about Nina's question is the issue that life has sped up, so that the clock with which we operate socioeconomically in our daily lives that we're all operating in is not the clock by which we evolved. The clock by which we evolved was the Earth rotating, and then the Earth rotating on its axis, and then rotating around the sun. That's the clock that's on that wall and on my watch. That's actually not the clock that is determining. It's actually this other thing, this accelerating treadmill. That's sort of a cartoon way of looking at it. And that's sped everything up. It's done one other curious thing. It's expanded lifetime, because we live much longer. Most people in this room, almost everybody in this room, if they lived to the average lifespan 150 years ago, would be dead. The average lifespan was in 40s, early low 40s, until about 1840, 1850 it started to rise. So lifespan is almost double. And all this other stuff has gone on, but despite all of these things, what's going on inside here is pretty much the same. It's the same as it was when we were hunter-gatherers. We evolved that way, and the genes that determined it. And the crucial thing, in terms of the way you put it, is that the problem in understanding this, and the problem we're facing, is that the time scales of evolutionary change socioeconomically is now much shorter than the lifespan of the individual, which is completely different than all evolution that preceded it. where the evolutionary timescales were, you know, at a minimum hundreds of thousands of years, and often millions, hundreds of millions of years. Changes took place. So you live your life, I live my life, and I have not evolved. I mean, by a lot, you know, in the Darwinian sense, none of us evolved. It takes many, many generations. But my God, as my socioeconomic life evolved, it's completely different than, you know, 1948 in London is completely different than 2016 in London. And Singapore in 1948 is unrecognizable from Singapore in 2016, not just physically, but everything you do. So our brains, though, you know, evolved to not to deal with evolution, change. So I don't know what that is. It just means that it's a source of incredible anxiety. I think, you know, it's, we're not going to be bored to, in other words, instead of being bored to death, which is what Keynes and Darwin were worried about, we're being accelerated to death by anxiety and, you know, psychotic breakdowns and so on. You know, I mean, very few people live in cities, live relaxed lives.
And you didn't go into this, Jeff, but the psychological effects of urban life.
That's what I meant. The psychological impact is phenomenal. You know, we're all going nuts, roughly speaking. Okay, let's see.
So how many of us are going to go nuts together? That's the optimum size question. Yeah.
There was maximum city size.
Yes, okay. Optimum city size.
So, that's also a really interesting question. City size, so going back to the biology first, turns out that all theory, amazingly, predicts the minimum and maximum size of a mammal, for example. Predicts that you can't have a functioning mammal less than the size of, sure, 2 to 3 grams. That's it. Anything below it cannot function. But it also predicts that if you make it too big, it also can't function. And roughly speaking, it's the size of a blue whale. So it's kind of interesting, actually, that, you know, you might get one twice as big, but you can't have one 10 times as big, or 10 times smaller than that. So you can ask, is that true of the city? Well, a city, you know, there's no minimum size. I mean, little villages and so on, they're still cities in some ways. And by the way, we have looked at, instead of looking at macroscopic areas, metropolitan areas, we've also looked at micro areas. And you know what's amazing? These scaling laws go down to cities, towns, villages that are just a few thousand. But there's huge variance. You know, I mean, there's great variance. But you know, if you just look at the averages, they follow what these cities. Anyway, so the question is there anything limiting the maximum? And in this theory, the answer seems to be no. You could just go on. And so, you know, but now if you ask, oh yeah, I'm sorry. If you ask realistically about cities, you know, could you have Tokyo? Tokyo's 35 million people. Could it be 100 million? Or could Los Angeles, which is 10 or 12 million, I guess, could it be 100 million people? Well, let's take Los Angeles, because I know Los Angeles. So you ask, could you have 100 million people here? Well, I would say, in principle, the answer is yes. You just want building. Nothing stopping building. You just keep building. However, if it's going to be a real city, meaning that it's an integrated unit, then you have a problem. Because if it's going to be an integrated unit, all those people, all those 100 million people somehow have to be connected. You know, in some way, there has to be. So I'm going to take a slight detour and raise the question, which what this does, the definition of the city. So the definition of the city, from this perspective, is not, again, all the buildings. The buildings don't define the city. What defines the city is the connectivity of the social network. You're part of the city if you're connected to the network, or at least you connect, twice a year, or twice a month or twice a day. You have to, you can define the threshold when you like. But you have to be connected in that network. That defines the city. So if you're going to have that with 100 million people, you have to have a transport system that accomplishes that. Now, in principle, if you build a city from scratch, you might plan that. But if you try to take it, retrofit the city, like Los Angeles, well, Los Angeles already has freeways that are 12 lanes wide. So if you're going to have 100 million people, they're going to have to be 25 or 30 lanes wide. And the railroad tracks, instead of being, 2 tracks or 4 tracks, they're going to have to be a dozen or 20 tracks. And the track, so that's impossible because you're not going to tear down most of the city in order just to have this transportation. So it ain't going to work. And so what will happen is you can still ask, well, why couldn't you just start building anywhere? And the answer is you could, but it will no longer be one city. And we already see that. What's going to happen is the city will bifurcate or disintegrate into various pieces, which you already see in many places, but here it really will. So you could imagine, just take a thought experiment, that Los Angeles could effectively be split into 2 cities, which are physically contiguous, but effectively are independent of each other. And of course, we see bits of that in places, and I think that's what's going to happen. So the answer is not a yes or no, it depends on the definition of the city, but in what I think is an important definition of the city, an important operational definition of the city, cities can't go on. They can go on in principle, but they won't in practice.
Yes, I think we've reached the end of our time, and we got through 6 very, very rich questions, I thought. That's true, because there were some subparts to some of those questions as well. So, I want to thank you, Jeff, just for the number of thoughts there. And I always maintain that the best lectures of this kind tantalize a little bit, but never fully answer the questions. And I suspect if there are plenty of us out there who have follow-up questions and things we want to tease out in our heads, you've given us plenty of fodder to do that. So thank you very much for being here with us, and thank you everybody for your questions as well. Back to Mr. Wang, the other has a final few announcements to make.
Thank you, Professor West and Aaron, for sharing your insights and experiences with us. We would now like to invite Mr. Lee Kwong-wen, Deputy Executive Director of CLC, on stage to present tokens of appreciation to our panelists and for the photo-taking session. Mr. Lee, please. Thank you, Mr. Lee. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our lecture, and we thank you for your participation. Do stay tuned to CLC Mailers and our website for information on our upcoming events. We'll also be seeking your feedback via email, and we really appreciate it if you could take some time to help us improve the lecture. We wish you a great evening and hope to see you again soon.